Many people argue that one of the great failures of this endless election campaign, indeed the greatest failure of all, is that the two main parties have so far got away with the impression we can have much better public services and local authorities can be rescued from crisis and all the rest of it without more money. The Institute for Fiscal Studies has been particularly withering about Tory and Labour, who they say have hidden and ducked the real choices ahead and been part of a conspiracy of silence. Well, we don't like conspiracies of silence on this show, and I'm joined therefore by a former Chancellor who I hope has the freedom to speak a bit more candidly about all of this, Lord Hammond. Philip Hammond, very good to see you here, Lord Hammond. Can I ask whether by and large you agree with the IFS there has been a conspiracy of silence in this election campaign?
Yes, I do. I think there's a reluctance of politicians to talk about the hard choices that face the country. The population is getting older, the proportion of people in work is going to be smaller, and the demands on public services are rising inexorably, and it just doesn't stack up to say we can have better public services and we can have lower taxes. Of course, there are things you can do around efficiency, cutting out waste, but there's a limit, and the pressures of demography, I'm afraid, will overwhelm the system unless we talk openly and honestly about how we're going to define the scope of what the state can do going forward.
You are a man who has sat behind the Treasury desk and looked at all the numbers and looked at the spreadsheets famously yourself in the past. When you look ahead, particularly at the unprotected departments for the next 4 years, do you kind of suck your teeth and think this is just impossible?
Yeah, it's definitely impossible. The reductions in spending that are baked in for the unprotected departments would be impossible to deliver, frankly, and I don't think anybody expects that they will be delivered. The whole thing will be reconfigured. But let's be clear, the unprotected departments are relatively small amounts of money. It's the big chunks, health, social care, education, defence, which, a few years ago was not on anybody's radar screen. Everybody now understands we're going to need to spend more on defence. The energy transition is going to cost us huge amounts of money, despite what people may have told us in the past. It's going to cost a lot of money. And nobody is talking about how we're going to fund this.
So we've got this rather unrealistic election campaign, an almost childish one in some ways. And you look forward, the Labour Party says that they can get through this with growth, a growth package. And there's no doubt with a government elected with a big majority and people thinking it's going to be there for 10 years or so and saying it's not going to change corporation tax might start to attract inward investment in larger quantities. But do you think there's a genuine plan for growth there?
Well, let me first of all say it's a massive step forward that the Labour Party is talking about growth rather than redistribution as the solution to all problems. If we'd been talking about, John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn, we would have had a different story in front of us. The Labour Party has understood that growth is important. They have got some policies that will promote growth, like, for example, significant reform of the planning system. Yeah. Unfortunately, they've also got other policies which are going to be damaging to growth, changing capital gains tax treatment for asset managers in the city, radical reform of workers' rights, which they've promised as an early stage. Never mind the rights and wrongs of these things, the fact is they will be negative factors for economic growth. So my conclusion is that, on balance, I don't believe the Labour Party has a plan here which amounts to a step change in economic growth in this country on the scale that would be needed to solve the fiscal challenge. So the fiscal challenge that Jeremy Hunt has been wrestling with will still be there for Rachel Reeves to wrestle with. And I don't quite agree with your point about a large Labour majority gives them this, that and the other ability. I think the real danger is that with a large Labour majority, especially if there isn't an effective opposition in place, when their plans for growth fail to deliver, the siren voices on the left of the party will be calling for more traditional left-wing solutions: tax more, borrow more, bash the rich, bash the producers, bash the investors. And that will not deliver a long-term solution for this country's challenges.
And I never know how seriously to take these extraordinary polls, but there is another extraordinary one out tonight giving Labour 450 seats and the Liberal Democrats 71. They would be the official opposition. The Tories would be down to 60. That's the kind of parliament which would really change things.
Yeah, that would greatly surprise me. But look, it's pretty clear from the polls that we're in for a period of Labour government with a very, very large majority. What is vitally important is that we have a credible, centre-right, but sensible, conservative opposition. If you'd asked somebody from the Labour Party where they were in the wake of the 2019 election, many people would have said we'll be out, for a decade. And yet it's bounced back. And the message of British politics in the first past the post system is always the same. You win elections from the centre, you veer to the left or the right at your peril, get close to the centre, and you'll be surprised how quickly you win back support.
And I was listening to Sir John Curtis, the great election guru, and he basically made the point that during this entire campaign, really the gap between the Tories and the Labour Party hasn't shifted much at all. And this goes back to two events. It goes back to Boris Johnson and Partygate, and it goes back to the Truss Kwasi Kwarteng moment. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. In my own mind, the outcome of this election, maybe not the magnitude of it, but the outcome of the election was determined in the autumn of 2022. I think the public had started to make up its mind when during the Partygate shenanigans, and then the Liz Truss government was the final straw for many people.
And if your party faces the kind of crushing defeat that looks likely at the moment, what is the future for, if I can put it this way, more centre, one nation, moderate conservatism?
Well, I hope that whatever happens on July the 4th, the Conservative Party will form the opposition, and it will be a centre-right Conservative Party determined to rebuild itself, to win power, to gain power, and that means getting in a position close to the centre, not on the extreme, not offering simple populist solutions.
Opening the door to Nigel Farage.
Absolutely not opening the door to Nigel Farage. In my view, there is no space for Nigel Farage in the Conservative Party of the future. That would be a disaster.
I'm just thinking back to the last time you joined me on the show, and I remember you warning way back that the Conservatives must not focus too much on immigration as the big issue, and they were in danger of underplaying the importance of public services and cost of living. Do you feel vindicated?
Look, I've always felt that while immigration is an issue and people feel very strongly about it, if I know the man on the British street, he's primarily concerned about his standard of living, his family's well-being, knowing that his wages will be rising year after year and that they'll be rising faster than prices in the shop. In other words, that he's going to get better off year on year. And it's surprising how quickly people's desire to find simple problems and simple solutions around politics dissipate if they are getting better off. Get back to economic growth, and we will find that some of the heat goes out of some of these other issues. Which doesn't mean to say we don't have to find a solution to the problem of illegal and uncontrolled immigration. Of course we do. And the only realistic solution to that is much closer cooperation with countries across Europe to protect our common border.
I was going to say that, in a sense, the Conservative Party threw Rishi Sunak a hospital pass, but after all, he ran very fast himself to grab that hospital pass. Assuming he keeps his seat, do you think he has a kind of duty or obligation to stay on for a bit and allow the Conservative Party some time to regroup, rethink before it chooses a new leader?
I would welcome that if he did, if he was in that position, he did decide to give the party a period of time to consider the possible options for the future and decide on the direction it wants to go. But that's not in anyone else's gift except for him.
And what do you think about the stories that Boris Johnson might return during the next Parliament? Does that fill you with excitement and enthusiasm?
It fills me with horror because, as we've just discussed, I think that Boris's conduct as Prime Minister was the beginning of the slide for the Conservative Party. If we're going to have the public trust us, we have to be competent, we have to be disciplined and prudent with public finances, and we have to govern from the centre. And populist rhetoric, profligate behaviour with public money, and a disregard for the basic ethics required in public office do not tick any of the boxes.
A really good conversation. Thank you so much for coming in, Lord Hammond, and having it with me.